So good afternoon. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us here today for making comics for younger readers. My name is Sarah Murphy. I am a K-12 librarian at an all-boys school here in New York City. So as you can imagine, this type of work is of huge interest to me and to my students. I am delighted to be joined by our esteemed panel today, and I will quickly introduce them to you so you can match names, faces, and books. So I'll start with Kevin. To my right, Kevin McCloskey is a graduate of SVA. He currently teaches illustration at Kutztown University in Pennsylvania. Kevin's books for young readers include Mrs. Fitz's Flamingos from 1992, and more recently, We Dig Worms, and the about-to-be-released The Real Poop on Pigeons. The latter two are from Toon Books, and you can see Kevin this afternoon at the Toon Books table 113, right? To Kevin's left is James Sturm. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Uh-huh.
Good. James is the co-founder and current director of the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont. And his books for young people include the Satchel Paige biography, Striking Out Jim Crow, and the Adventures in Cartooning series, written in collaboration with CCS alumni Andrew Arnold and Alexis Frederick Frost, and the also imminently to be released Birdsong from Toon Books, and James can also be found at the Toon Books table 113. To James's left is Noelle Stevenson. Noelle's a graduate of the Maryland Institute College of Art. Noelle was a writer on Disney's Wander Over Yonder series. She's the co-writer of the Boom Studios Lumberjanes series, and she's worked with Marvel and DC Comics, and she is also the New York Times best-selling author of Nimona, which began as a web comic and last year was published by HarperCollins, and Noelle lives in Los Angeles. And to my right is Laurent Linn. Laurent is originally from Dallas, Texas, and he is a former Emmy award-winning puppet designer and builder for Jim Henson's Muppet Workshops and Sesame Street Muppets. He currently lives here in New York City, and he works as an art director and designer for children's and teen books. And he is the writer and illustrator of Draw the Line, a YA book, and his first book, which will be released by Simon & Schuster in May 2016. So welcome to all of you, and welcome to all of you. So before we begin our conversation, each of the panelists is going to give you an idea of what their work really looks like with a few slides, and I'm going to hand it over to James right now, and he will begin that conversation.
Thanks for moderating, and thanks for everyone for coming out on this blustery day. So yeah, I put together a few slides just to kind of introduce myself for many of you who don't know who the hell I am. But this was one of the books that I encountered as a 6-year-old at the Scholastic Book Fair at my elementary school, the Ed Emberley Book of Animals. And if you're not familiar with Ed's work, what he does is he takes simple shapes and he shows you how to construct these figures. And this is kind of what blows my mind about comics. And as a kid, I couldn't articulate it like this, but the idea that these this cacophony of abstract shapes could come together and suddenly become this thing that's alive and has personality, and you can look at it and see it at once as an abstraction, but also as this personality, this thing that lives on the page. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world, and I'm still mesmerized by this, 40-something odd years later. And from this distinction between children's books and comics, I mean it's always been a blurry line, and I really fell in love with Peanuts really early on, and like the Ed Emberley stuff, simple shapes that came alive on the page. And Emberley's work, it was alive, but it didn't Peanuts had a soul, and this was the first collection I ever got, even before I was reading it in the newspaper. But even at the time, I remember reading the back of that book thinking, everybody knows peanuts are more fun than anybody. Whoa! And then you read it, and there's like these really depressing little stories. And this kind of disconnect between, I mean, even the cover of this is Lucy just like mouthing off. I don't know. I just thought that was funny. And these are the books I read as a kid and loved. And it's funny, like our definition of what we think of as a cartoonist these days is really broad. But in the 40s and 50s, it was much more narrower, like what a cartoonist was. And if we applied our definition today, retroactively, people like Marie Hall Etz, who did Oli the Sea Monster, which was a graphic novel, Virginia Lee Burton, they would be graphic novels, but we called them children's book authors back then. And I love the experimentation with different medium and this beautiful hushed quality that her work brings. And it's still like it's funny, sometimes you forget you read stuff and then you encounter it at a library or a yard sale and it just like brings you back to your childhood. And Marie does that. I fell in love with Marvel comics and started reading those passionately. William Steig's on my Mount Rushmore cartoonist too, that simple, beautiful line. And I just love, people who can capture that. That New Yorker cover is my all-time favorite New Yorker cover because it's just like, it just says everything about aging, from the two expressions on those faces. And the emotion that goes in a children's book, like trying to capture that experience, I think is so important. And for those not familiar, this is like my series that I did that grew out of some assignments at the Center for Cartoon Studies, trying to teach children how to create comics, but at the same time, like give them a really cool story as well. And these are the books that I'm coming out this year with Toon Books and the Hyperion, some Hyperion stuff. And I put this is an adult graphic novel I did for Drawn and Quarterly, and I put this in here because it was conceived as a children's book. And at a certain point, there was themes that got away from me, and I realized this might not be appropriate for children. But the way it's set up, the way big panels in every page, spreads like in its DNA as children's book. So it's interesting to see how starting to work in children's book affects my adult work. And and that's my introduction. And then I did this book, but
like that. Yeah, this is my Real Poop on Pigeons. My idea for a title, honestly, was Pigeons Are Fly. But the powers that be had this better idea. And the drawings, the beautiful drawings around the edge are German lithos, chromolithos, but the little character in the center is mine. And I did a Toon book just last year. It happened by chance. I had a career as an illustrator probably 25 years ago, and it sort of nothing had happened too much since. But my wife is a librarian, and she needed 3 books about worms. The program she works at today, she had Bob and Otto and Diary of a Worm, but she needed a 3rd book about worms, or she couldn't do worms. And so I just made a big dummy book about worms on paper bags. And on the bottom of paper bags, it tells you where they're made and who made them on some of them. And this one was made by Ernesto Cruz in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where I used to live. So I thought that was like a magical bag.
do you credit him as a collaborator?
I think actually they covered his name a little bit so that he wouldn't be able to sue. Yeah. So there's my wife, Pat. And she goes from school to school, and she reads these books. And I haven't been looking at books for a long time, but she's got this... who stole my hat book? And I'm looking at it. It's 32 pages, but if I looked at it really close, like 5 of those pages are repeats. He's got the exact same dots on his face. I said, well, that's not as hard as I thought it was. And it sold 1 million copies. So I did that for her. I made the book. It was a surprise. And then I sent it on to Françoise Moulet at Toon Books. And within 3 hours, she got back to me. I think there must have been a hole in their catalog. She said, we love it. And she suggested some of these pages, and I ended up getting paper bag recycled into flat paper, because that was easier to work on. But I kept using recycled paper because worms are natural recyclers. Years ago, that was my claim to fame, I'd written a book called Mrs. Fitz's Flamingos, about a woman who collects flamingos, puts them on her rooftop. At the time, I lived in Hoboken, and I really thought of it as a Hoboken story. But I think there's like 48 libraries in Brooklyn and only one in Hoboken. So somebody said, let's make it happen in Brooklyn. Guaranteed the first 48 sales. Here's my thought on why comics for young kids are becoming so popular. They're great for reluctant readers. And I found this old golden book. Actually, I thought it was by Richard Scarry, but I looked, it was by his friend, J.P. Miller, the illustrations. And there's 37 words on there where she asked the duck, will you help me paint this grain of wheat? No, said the duck. You can get rid of all, she asked, she said, he said, and you can bring it down to 13 words if you put it in comic format. And for a kid, that makes a lot of difference. A lot of kids are visual learners. They just progress through the story that much faster. I mean, I even get confused in novels sometimes, like who said what, but not in graphic novels. One of my great influence was Ripley's, believe it or not.
We're going there, are we?
Many cartoonists I don't think they're crazy about him, but the man was a cartoonist. He came to New York. He was larger in life. He got this picture of a man-eating tree, and he's able to draw in charcoal. It's in a suit. He's so cool. I did some illustration that turned out lucky for me. Sometimes you're asked to do things for free for good causes, and I do. There's, in Hoboken, where I used to live, there's the Hoboken Historical Museum, and they're making a series of chapbooks where they're interesting older Hobokeners were being interviewed. And this guy named Vinnie Torrey, who had the last pigeon coop in Hoboken, let me go visit his coop. And I'd drawn that original picture that they used on the cover years ago for a guidebook I drew and wrote about Hoboken, New Jersey. And so Vinnie took me into his house, and he was like having breakfast. My brother and I had breakfast with him, and he took us up to the coop, and he was blowing my mind with these facts about pigeons. And he said, you know, pigeons give milk. The male and the female have lactic glands in their crop, and they give milk. And I said, that's impossible. He goes, no, it's possible. I went back to the Hoboken Historical Society. I said, you've got to put about the pigeon milk. They said, no, the text is already done. The book is done. Your job is to do the illustrations. So I did the illustrations, but I always filed that in the back of my mind. It's unbelievable. Believe it or not, the pigeons give milk. And a bunch of other facts I got to put in there that the pigeons used to deliver the mail before there was airmail on airplanes, and that they can fly faster than a car without stopping. I tried to make that look a little like Vinnie in his car, because he used to drive to Gettysburg, let out his pigeons, and they'd make it back to Hoboken before anybody else's. And it's so fortunate that the museum sent me there, because he got priced out of Hoboken. He's not in Hoboken anymore himself. There's these crazy breeds of pigeons that are just unbelievable. They breed them to look like owls. They have such small beaks that they cannot even break their own egg open. They're just so overbred that you have to listen, like that somebody wants to come out of here, and they break it open for them. But that's kind of amazing. There we go, Noelle.
Yeah. Hi. So I have a much much shorter presentation here. Yeah, so this is my first graphic novel, Nimona. It started as a school assignment at the Maryland Institute College of Art. It started as a two-page comic for my junior illustration class. I just wanted to, see if I could do this comic with original characters, and then I kind of liked the first 2 pages, so I did the next 4 pages, and then I kind of liked those too, so I did 10 more pages, and then I was like, hey, I'll do this as a webcomic, and I did. And I really liked. I was really big into storytelling as a kid. I was always writing my own. Even before I could write, I would have my mom transcribe picture books for me, and then I would illustrate them. I was making comics from a really young age, but I didn't really know they were comics. I didn't think that I had much of an interest in comics until I got to school. I had a creative writing minor. I liked to try my hand at prose and writing stories and stuff, but I did not fit in very well in my school's creative writing classes. It was a lot of like, write the next great American novel, be Flannery O'Connor. And I tried, and as it turns out, if you've ever read like a college freshman trying to write like Flannery O'Connor, it's like not cute. So I was like, maybe writing is just not cut out for me. I'll just stick to what I know, which is art. But then I ended up in a comics class kind of by accident. It was the only class still open. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, I don't have to just rely on descriptions and prose. Like, I can tell so much in in that space between text and art, which was just this revelation to me. And I jumped right into it. I had a webcomic going about 6 months later. Was when Nimona kind of started happening. So this is on the left.
Yeah.
On the left, that's the original first page of Nimona that I did for my class. And then it ended up going through, I didn't know what the look was going to be. I didn't know what the characters were going to look like. So when it was published by HarperCollins, I went back in and I redid the first few pages to be in a more consistent style. So that's just, kind of cool, I guess.
The drudgery of cartooning.
That wasn't my idea to put on there, but I do like these drawings of my
I put
male
those on there.
characters posed very beautifully. I assume we'll talk more about that one later. This is Lumberjanes. It's a series I co-created and co-wrote for Boom Studios, and that happened after kind of like 2 months after I graduated from school. I moved to LA. The editor asked me to contribute character designs and then asked me to co-write. So I did the cover. I drew this cover, and it was this. It's a story about Girl Scouts at summer camp fighting monsters and solving mysteries, which is just like what could possibly go wrong. That might be it. Yeah, that's it for me.
I'm gonna grab that quicker.
Thank you. And now we're something completely different. Actually, it's all very different, which is wonderful. I mean, it shows all the different, that's one thing about comics and graphic novels. It really is a vision of the creator that you can really bring out. I'm curious, how many of you are illustrators? Quite a few. How many are writers? Quite a few. Okay, so a lot of creative people in the room. So what my book is a young adult novel, but it's illustrated. It has 90 pages of art, mainly comics, so it's kind of an unusual thing. What really fascinates me is how teens now, not just teens, younger kids too, but teens are, art is very accessible for them. And fan art is such a huge thing now for a lot of young adult novels and even younger middle grade. The kids are drawing like crazy. And so I wanted to explore the idea of how a teen can use art. And I want to, how a teen can use art to change the world and fight brutality through art. Sorry, this wind has gotten allergies in the air for sure. So this is kind of a hybrid. It's mainly a novel, but there's a lot of art, comics, and sketches, and all types of things in the book as well. I wanted to explore the idea of most creative people. Well, like we've heard, you were always saying, like we all kind of have our own weirdnesses and don't quite fit in. I don't know if many people actually feel like they fit in high school. The main character, his name is Adrian. He's obsessed with superheroes, Renaissance art, and he's gay, and he's nonviolent. So he creates a gay Renaissance nonviolent superhero named Graphite, who he creates a secret comic online. And so this is so a lot of opportunity for comics and graphic novel type of art in novels. It's opening up now. Brian Selznick with Hugo Cabret and so many other books broke down, like the walls blew off and the ceiling blew off. Also C.C. Bell. I mean, so many people are doing great stuff that is now being very accepted. So the difference with young adult novels is usually the art in the book is the main character's art. Unlike a middle grade or picture book where is the form, the art itself is the storytelling. With most young adult novels, and like we see his sketches, he witnesses a horrific hate crime. He can't draw, and so this is what he does in his. So there's so much power in art that is storytelling that can't be done in words. And so I think that is a whole new era. Hopefully, we'll see. Because teens now are so visual. Kids, if you think about it. Well, when I was growing up, we had the 3 TV channels, 3 networks, PBS and the local channel. No such thing as a computer, a cell phone, nothing. So we go to the movies once in a while, but we wouldn't see movies that weren't right for a 7-year-old. 7-year-olds are seeing movies that, they can look at on their phone any time of day. So kids are very visually, their visual language is very advanced now. And so there's a lot more we can do in books. So this is his comics. I'm going to buzz through some of these, but he basically explores the idea of how he projects himself into the superhero that he's created. And what I also wanted to explore is everyone has superpowers, meaning I want the reader to figure out what is your superpower, and his is art. How can you, in real life, change the world? Maybe it's just being an excellent friend. I throw in different things here and there. That's a Maxfield Parrish painting that Inya used on an album cover back in the 90s. So there are things in there, and that's Giovanni Boldini. It's a Raphael painting up there. So there's different, influences are brought into it. We see his sketches. With his friends, he creates superhero versions of his friends and gives them superpowers of aspects of them they don't believe in themselves, but he sees that he helps his friends this way figure out who they are. So this is a very talented 16-year-old who in the book he draws this in one night. It took me, 2 weeks or something? But at the same time it has to be, of that quality. This is his friend Audrey, who doesn't think she's very attractive. So her superhero name is Sultry. So there's a lot of opportunity. Then the brutality, I really go through the brutality as well, and go there, because with YA you really can go there. So there are age-appropriate ways of dealing with art in books, but with teen, you're really dealing with real-life issues, and you can go there with it. And that is it for me.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that you ended talking about age, because I'd like to begin by asking you about audience. And Noelle, I'm particularly interested in your audience on the web versus your audience in print. And I'm also curious to know if you started out thinking that this would have sort of young adult teen appeal.
I think it was given the label YA after the fact when it became a book. Webcomics don't really have labels like that, but and I don't think at the beginning I did. I think there were a few swear words that had to be edited out from the comic version before it could be a YA novel. But there really wasn't much that was changed about it. I think that naturally my voice tends towards. I've always kind of figured that I write a lot and I draw a lot for myself as a 13, 14-year-old. I think that was just the time in my life when I just loved things the most, and I got the most into books, and I got the most into movies and things, and had my favorite characters. And so when I write, I kind of the idea of writing for someone like that is very appealing to me, just because that's going to be your biggest fan, and so that just comes very naturally to me. And I wanted to reach out to, people who were like me when I was younger. Not that much younger at the time, but but I don't believe in pulling punches, I think. As with Lumberjanes was always an all ages comic. But I think, we tried really hard to push the limits of what that meant to be all ages. I don't think that it means that the themes have to be watered down, that, everything has to be explained and handed to you on a silver platter. Kids are smart and they'll figure those things out. They even if they don't get all of the themes that are maybe a little bit heavier right away as kids. I mean, I remember some of the movies and books that I grew up with that had incredibly dark themes sometimes, just like the fact that like The Never-Ending Story was like a children's movie that we grew up with, or like Winnie the Pooh's Grand Adventure, where they could be very heavy and existential and deal with the terror of growing up and the terror of the world around you. And I didn't understand everything that they meant at the time, and sometimes it took revisiting them as an adult to understand that. But I definitely understood it as a kid, and they stayed with me for a really long time because of that. So yeah, I believe in telling the story that I want to tell, not putting in anything gratuitous or, you know, anything actively age inappropriate, but also, you know, saying, you know, it's not age inappropriate to have gay characters. It's not age inappropriate to question the world around you, or question authority, or question your place in the world. Like, those are things that kids need to see and understand and develop their own understanding of.
When I'm building a collection at my library, I like to think about representing the world of my students, every different kind of family, every different kind of background, but at the same time also providing a window out into the broader world for them. So I completely agree, and I'm so grateful to all of you for this sort of range of experience that you're able to present in these books. I wanted to ask James and Laurent, and if anybody else wants to jump in on this, please do. But you both have sort of a meta element to some of your work, specifically James with the Adventures in Cartooning series. As you mentioned, it tells a story, but it also gives sort of an instruction manual for kids and how to make comics. And Laurent, in Draw the Line, the Adrian character is the one who's creating the artwork that we, the reader, then see. So just curious if you think there's, you know, do comics provide this special opportunity to sort of provide instruction as well as storytelling to your audience?
That's a good question. With the Adventures in Cartooning, I definitely had a goal to. It's kind of like Marshall or Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics meets Ed Emberley's Build a World, right? And in putting across that information, you know, there's information and there's knowledge, you know, and like we're inundated with information, and it doesn't land and get absorbed unless you care about the characters. And it's great that, hopefully by showing what you can do with it is the best lesson that you can give. Like, so the lessons are integrated throughout. But my favorite point of Adventures in Cartooning is when the knight turns out to be the spoiler alert, the princess, which is in itself a trope these days, but it's I know it was exciting for a lot of, you know, especially a lot of feedback I got from young readers, especially females. But I think that's I think with comics you have words and you have pictures, and they each have like their own track, and sometimes the narration kind of puts you in a certain place, and then the images are almost also telling your story, and there's the cracks between the words and the images where something meta can develop, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the Toon books also come with some sort of tips on how to read them aloud, which I find really helpful because it is different, right? Reading comics aloud to kids. And when you read them aloud, if you're kind of guiding them through the mechanics, there is some teachable moment about how to create the thing.
I was actually last night thinking, I was talking to some people about like, when's the day that Francois is going to be like, nope, don't need this in the back of the book anymore. It's like, how do you watch a movie? At one point, people are like, why are we cutting to the person on the train tracks? And now they're in the train. This is so confusing. And then people don't need that. So like, we'll know like the revolution's been won when that back matter's been taken away.
People inherently know how to read comics. I think, you know, certainly my students do. And even sort of some of the parents and fellow teachers who are like, even they do if you ask them to open it up and start reading. But what's challenging, I think, is reading them aloud to an audience. So for that, I'm quite grateful for that, for those instructions. But Laurent, what can you add to this idea of sort of not teaching, but showing that that drawing and creating cartoons and comics and heroes and characters is something that kids can be doing actively?
I think we all know there's an age where, very sadly, every kid draws. Every kid is an artist until they're told they're not. Or until in school you have to draw a certain way, or this person draws good, I don't draw good, So for younger kids, it's not as much of an issue because I think, like picture books, kids will read a picture book or a kid's comic or, look at a comic and then they'll draw it. You probably all have seen now it's manga, like everyone's drawing manga. And so for older readers, like for a teen reader, it's different because a lot of kids who probably are creative and draw for themselves secretly don't feel they're good. So, and who cares if you're good or not? It's an expression. So with this, I feel like one aspect of being an author for YA, for other age ranges as well, is that when I was a teen and I was going through issues, I could not have handled it like my main character. But now I'm able to show, here's a way of dealing with these issues. Here's a way that is, through the tunnel into the light. And so with his influences is Renaissance art and superheroes, but superheroes that don't destroy. So hopefully it's a way of showing that there are other things to pull in from copying something you love. What are other influences, and how can you create your art, or how can you follow your passion in your own unique way and reach into yourself, what your interests are, and not copy? Because I think a lot of kids feel like they need to copy, and hopefully it's that kind of opposite message. With a YA though, you can't be instructional. It has to be very subtle.
Yeah.
It can't be didactic in any way because that's the turn off. For most of us, I think. Actually.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to switch to a little bit of nonfiction. So, Kevin, you mentioned earlier when you were learning these facts about pigeons and you just sort of stored them away and couldn't wait to share them in this form. I think writing or drawing, nonfiction carries different challenges and different responsibilities to your reader. And James, you've also written nonfiction, the Satchel Paige biography for young people.
It's still, I still think of it as fiction in a lot of ways, but yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's
Anyways,
get to that in a second. But I wondered, Kevin, if you could start us off by talking a little bit about how do you create dialogue in a nonfiction world? How do you create character in a nonfiction world? And what's driving the story? Is it the facts that you want to share? Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, it's the facts that I want to share. Absolutely. There's always a kid who is so excited that they know something and they want to share. It's like science fair, but fun. Yeah. Then I guess I really prefer books where the same person wrote and drew it, because you look at the words and you look at the pictures. You look at my drawing of the 10-foot worm and you realize that's not a photograph. That's not exactly what the worm looks like. But then it says underneath that the Australian gypsum worm can grow over 10 feet tall. You sort of understand that the person is explaining it to you in kind of a happy way, It's a fun fact. And so that's the way I'd like to present it. If I had black and white kind of X-rays, there's no bones, so that wouldn't work. So it's best to draw.
Yeah.
Best to draw.
So James, tell me about what you mean. You think of the Satchel Paige bio as fiction.
Well, before I did the Satchel Paige stuff, I did a triptych, I guess, of 3 historical fiction pieces that Drawn Up Quarterly has published over the years, and I refer to them as like historically plausible. And Grace Paley, the great poet and short story writer, she had a line once saying how every story told twice is fiction. And so like for Satchel Paige, I mean, here was a guy who exaggerated everything, like created his own myth, and you start doing research on his life, and you're just like, yeah, right. Like I don't believe anything of it. There's not the records of most of it. And then baseball is, where people brag a lot. So it was more like, okay, well, what was his significance? What was, what impact did he have? And there was a book I came across called All God's Dangers, and it was about this graduate student from Harvard who went down south to research a farming co-op. And he came across, everyone's like, you should talk to this guy. And he was like this 90-year-old African American, never learned to read, but he had like a steel trap of a memory and was like a natural storyteller. So he did an oral history of this guy, and I read that book, and I was like, okay, here's the voice of the narrator, and he can talk about how Page influenced him when he played ball. And I think with history, like I really, with all those biographies, like I really reject this great, the great person notion of history. And there are heroes and great people, but they're born out of movements. They're born out of a specific time and place, and I like exploring that context and how that stuff comes about. So that's what I'm more interested in, is like getting some kind of emotional truth. So even stuff like the adventures in cartooning, like those enthusiasms that the characters have and the way they, like this little elf fights with the knife, it's like, that's just like watching my children like just beat each other up. It just has to, if you don't have that kind of feel of it, that the Worm book, that just doesn't work unless Kevin's enthusiasms are so genuine and pour through, like you're tapping into something with Nimona, like your own enthusiasms and passions, and it really has to, that's to me is so much more important than almost any other aspect.
Yeah. I've always thought of graphic novels similar to movie scripts or television scripts, in that you have the dialogue and the action, and really the real meat of what's going on. And so when you talk about a book like The Satchel Paige, I think about movie biographies, which are not straight nonfiction at all, but they occupy this other space of true and real, but also an artist's creation. And sometimes in the library it can be kind of frustrating because we're sort of forced to categorize, thanks to our pal Dewey, and like a book like We Dig Worms can occupy a lot of different places on the shelf. It can be in the animals science section. It can be in I actually have it in the easy, or sorry, we don't say easy because it's not easy for everyone, but the early readers section. But sometimes I wish I had multiple copies so that people could find them in other places. Satchel Paige is in comics, he's also in baseball, he's also in biography, etc.
I noticed they're using the term more informational instead of nonfiction.
Yeah.
I saw this great children's book about Jose Guadalupe Posada, and nobody really knows a lot about him except what he left behind. And so you've got to fill in so many blanks that it's true to him, so it's informational.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I have my work cut out for me when I go back and reorganize my whole library that way. So I hoped we could talk a little bit about gender. You mentioned, James, that there is sort of this surprise towards the end of Adventures in Cartooning where the knight turns out to be female. Nimona is a shapeshifter, and I think gender seems to me to be a big part of what's in her character and what's in that book. Certainly in Draw the Line, Adrian's sexual identity is a big part of his journey through that book. And even in the Toon books, Kevin, that we're looking at here, I noticed that the characters are, they're very young. They're almost pre-gendered in some ways. They reflect did I offend you? But they reflect the reader, and they reflect that sort of egalitarian preschool where the boys and the girls are playing together and they're all digging with worms. So I wondered, with comics for young people, and Noelle, maybe you could start us off here, if you see either a responsibility or an opportunity to explore gender in not just a concept, but also a visual way.
Nimona was, I think, it deals with a lot of tropes from both fairy tale and from superhero stories. And I had less of an interest in really obviously lampshading those tropes and being like, oh, she's a princess but she kicks ass, or whatever, or sorry, there are kids here, I apologize. The very odd, you mentioned that it has become a trope in its own right these days. They're but I'm a girl, and it's just I have less of an interest in that myself. I prefer to just release my characters and have them do what they will. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to like really experiment with the way that they present and the way that their roles in the stories are that might be unusual for the gender roles that are expected from them. So Nimona is actually, I see it as kind of, most of the characters are very gender neutral, that's how I see it. But also I think they could be considered gender swapped from the expected roles that you might see in a fairy tale or in a superhero story. So Nimona is the one who loves violence. She's the one who, both of the knights are very tall and lithe and beautiful, and she is short and powerful and like thick and stocky. And she's the one who is completely unsexualized, while the male characters might be, from time to time, shown in a very lovely way.
I thought those pinups, I thought that was like a Vanity Fair cover or something.
Yeah, I mean, I had to draw them in armor all the time, so I think one day I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna like draw these guys like posed all cute, and
Remind everyone.
Yeah, so I don't know.
We can
I
use the
just
sexy word. Come on.
Yeah, it's cute. It's very. I just yeah, I think my interest was in just presenting a different way for these characters to be, not having, I don't think anyone ever says to Nimona that she can't do anything because she's a girl. It's not a part of this story in particular. It doesn't mean that there's a problem with stories that do have that as a plot point. It's just not here. No one thinks she can't do anything because she's a girl. It's just surprising that on top of being a girl, she's also like a shark, a rhinoceros, and a dragon. But I mean, she presents from time to time as being, you know, male presenting characters, and it's really handled as not that big of a deal. If you can turn into an octopus, that's a lot weirder than turning into, you know, a large burly male presenting person with a beard. You know, it's really not, all of that is in her repertoire. It's not considered out of the usual for her, but you know, it's there. It's certainly an interest of mine, but I do think it is somewhat a response. I feel that it is my responsibility to just show a new way to be for people of all genders. To say that like you've never seen yourself as a protagonist, maybe, but here you go. You know, here's like a, you know, short and chubby androgynous girl main character. And here is a femme, you know, gay supervillain, like, you know, things like that. You can really just say that, like, just show a new way to exist in a story, and that you don't have to be the punchline or the quirky best friend all the time. Yeah.
Do you want to add to that?
I'll just say it's an amazing time for art and literature, because when Sesame Street started, it was a show for 2 to 10-year-olds, because there's Mr. Rogers, Captain Kangaroo, and nothing else. And so it had to service this 2 to 10-year-olds. That, like, every one of those ages is completely different. Now it's for 2 to 4-year-olds, because there's so many other shows out there that have that broad appeal and have specific appeal. It doesn't have to be broad. So books are the same way. Comics are the same way. So with a book like a YA novel that deals with a gay character, it would have been kind of the one storyline, the coming out story, the whatever it would be. Now, there's, for all different ages and of readers, there are stories that can be very specific now, so, which is an amazing thing. And so you can have the character be truer to him or herself in the story, instead of representing an entire type of people, you know, wrongly. So what I wanted to explore with as far as gender as well as sexuality is superheroes. And superheroes like X-Men, the mutant, you know, X-Men, there's been a lot of talk about it. X-Men in some ways could represent GLBT people, because you're born different. You have this thing about you that others see as freakish, but you think it's special. You have to hide it. And superheroes in general hide their identities. And it's interesting. I really explored this a lot, because you think of Batman and Superman. Superman, his true identity is the superhero. So his disguise is his human life. is the Clark Kent. Batman, his true self is the human. He's Bruce Wayne. His disguise is Batman. So there's different ways of approaching it. And I think any kid in high school or junior high or elementary school, you put a cape on, you put on your superhero outfit to go to school to be what you think people expect you to be or to fit in, but inside you're something else. And so I think with gender, that adds, or sexuality, gender identity, it adds a whole nother layer to it. And if you're hiding who you are, like my character is an artist, no one gets that. He's nonviolent, no one gets that. So he's hiding so many things, and I think a lot of people are. But so I think now with older readers, you can go there further. With younger readers, it is tricky because, like you were talking about, I know you'll talk more about with very young kids, they're like Elmo and Ernie and even Bert, those characters, when you ask a preschool, are they a boy or a girl, they sometimes don't know. Big Bird is a boy, but people think Big Bird's a girl. So at that age, it's a certain age where suddenly you're segmented into the groups. So I think that certainly applies with comics too.
I was so surprised the first time someone referred to like Piglet and like Rabbit on Winnie the Pooh as boys. It was like so mind blowing to me.
Piglet, I'm not so sure.
It seems so unnecessary though. After like for some, I don't know.
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm working in an all-boys school right now, so I am finding that comics are often a great way for me to get the boys to read about girls. I was actually very surprised when I began how reluctant some of the boys were to read books that involved girls. So I don't think we always have to sneak up on them, but that certainly does work. Is there anything you want to add to that, Kevin and James?
Well, I was just thinking of like conversations that I've developing some TV shows, and literally people that saying like, oh yeah, girls will watch boy shows, but boys won't watch girl shows, and that's that's the default setting there. And yet it's weird, like, I'm raising 2 daughters and we have close friends that are raising 2 sons, and, they're all welcome to play with dolls or trucks or whatever. And I just remember taking a walk in the woods, and there are my 2 daughters like building little fairy houses, and then we turn around and Simon and Eli are just smashing trees with sticks, And on one hand, there is a fluidity to these things, and on the other hand, like there are these, these I don't know, biological suggestions, stronger than suggestions, of course. But I don't know. It's just interesting how you navigate those things. Like I think it's a really tricky. I mean, you could probably do a whole seminar on just that question.
Absolutely. Kevin, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, I was impressed that you thought so deeply about my book and that the kids were pre-gendered. But the truth is, the art director, the editor is Francoise Moulet. She decided to put the female character on the front. I mean, I had a bundle of 32 drawings, so in a way it's a collaboration, but it makes sense. And I did try to not always, I just randomized who was asking the question and who had the answer, so that it was just a group of people, and there's no real single heroic, sort of like groupthink. They've all figured out how cool these animals are.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we do have a few minutes before we have to wrap up, so I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see you all better. And if there are any questions from the audience, we can probably take 2 or 3. I see a hand in the middle with a black jacket. Yeah. Hi.
I have a question for Noelle. It's about getting into someone mentioned that you were a writer and wanted to over yonder. Is it difficult to get into that industry? Writing on television?
So the question is about writing on television and getting into that industry, and then if I could add to that also the similarities maybe between writing for print, web, television.
Yeah, I kind of tripped and fell into animation. I moved out to LA when I graduated from school because I'd been an intern there for Boom Studios, and I'd lived in LA and I loved LA, so it's like, hey, stuff is happening there, I will go there. And then my agent, my literary agent for Nimona, said that he had some friends there who did TV and film representation. The idea was to rep Nimona for an option those film rights, but I guess they had other ideas as well as that. So they sent me into a lot of meetings, and I ended up being sent to a meeting at Disney with Craig McCracken, who's the showrunner of Wander Over Yonder. And I had no idea what I was doing there, but I just went with it, I guess. I don't know. I'd never really written a cartoon before. I'd written a short Bravest Warriors episode for the web. And so I technically had a script to show for it, but a lot of it was just learning on my feet. But it was really great. It was just it felt a lot like an accident, but I think that cartoons are such a visual medium, and actually a lot of the people writing for cartoons are sitcom writers or former sitcom writers, and they're not always a great fit because it's a lot more, depends on the cartoon. There might be more about the jokes or like the wordplay, and depending on the cartoon, a lot of them are just a lot more about visual humor and body language and that kind of thing. And so Craig specifically was looking for people who were very visual thinkers. And I guess they read Nimona and thought I was a good fit. So it worked out well.
It was an accident, but how many wonderful accidents one has when you create something that people love and enjoy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so much of this stuff is born out of this personal work that one creates.
Yeah.
And then you're not like pulled into something that you're not right for. They see this thing, it's like, oh, like okay, this is something that.
Well, it's great. I think the thing that actually got me the job, and this is funny, Craig asked me what I thought like the height of humor was or something, and I'd just seen like the Muppet movie the night before, so I was like, I think the Muppets are like the funniest thing to ever exist. He's like, good answer. So good answer.
Yeah.
It's just on my mind. Great.
Do we have another question? Over there, striped shirt.
Just in general to both group, I guess, and especially to Noelle. Do you ever feel that writing about topics is a struggle in itself because you're afraid that one publisher or that your family won't accept it, especially in terms of gender and sexuality?
So the topics being a challenge to the reader or to the publisher or to the people who know you, how do you deal with that?
In the second issue of Lumberjanes, two of our girl characters who are implied to have a big crush on each other so far up to that point, kiss. And it was something that was really important to me to include. Nimona has themes as well, but they're mostly subtext. So it was very important to me to show it, make it clear really early on that these characters had this crush, that they liked each other, and everyone was so scared. Like our artist was not out at the time to her family. She was very worried that they would see it. We thought that we were going to get a bunch of angry letters from parents for including like inappropriate themes in children's books, which for any kid who's ever been gay, like it's that it's something that you really want to see from media that's targeted at you. And actually, they changed the words of the script that I didn't know they were going to. But the publishers at Boom, most of whom were queer in some way, they changed the line from "Did you just smooch me?" to "Did you just save me?" and muddled buried it a little bit deeper, which I was very disappointed in. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened. Like we got no angry letters. Like only good things came from that. So my thought is that the fear is so much worse. And like sometimes there will be angry letters, but it doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And like if you believe in it, just write what it is that you feel and like let other people deal with it how they will. Whether it's your family, whether it's your publisher, like sometimes it will be an issue. Sometimes it will be something that you have to stand your ground about. Sometimes it will be something that you have to compromise about, which sucks, but that's where we are sometimes. So, but the worst thing you can do, I think, is to censor yourself before anyone else even gets a chance to have a problem with it. Mm-hmm. I think it's so easy to do. It's so easy to give into that fear and just push yourself farther and farther every time.
I agree with all of that, and I think it's changing a lot now. Publishers, well, it's a passionate group. Publishers, artists, librarians are the true superheroes, and I don't mean that lightly. There's a passionate group of community, And so I think it's the one issue of if you're creating something that your friends and family you might be, revealing something, that's one thing, and that's just a personal comfort level. But I'll show you this illustration that I've never seen in a YA novel. It's just quick, but it's two gay superheroes kissing in space, basically. And so I showed it to my editor, and it's going to be hard to see, but that's it. And the editor, he goes, "Oh, they're cute." And that was the only response. And so there's a lot more you can. I'm not going to say I was going to say get away with, which sounds horrible. It's not that. There's a lot more now that teens need. And it's different because they're the gatekeepers. Teens, a lot of middle grade readers, they're the ones who buy these books. They're the ones who buy them themselves. Younger kids with comics and graphic novels and literature, it's the parents or the whoever. So that makes a difference too. But I say be true to yourself, like any art form. What is your vision? What do you have to say to the world? And say it. And the honesty and truth comes through. I think that's true for everyone here in the work. Like you were saying about the enthusiasm too and the energy. That needs to be there. Otherwise, it's going to be a false story. So.
Well, we do have to, unfortunately, end here. I think we could go on for a long time, and I'm so grateful to all of you for this terrific conversation. And I encourage all of you to go over to the exhibition hall and continue the conversation. If you did want to ask somebody something, just a reminder, Kevin and James will be at booth 113. Noelle will be at 135. C135. And Laurent will be around and about.
At large.
So thank you so much. We do want to clear out to make room for the next panel, but thank you to all of you.